started.
Yes.
My name is Don Connolly, and I'm Public Information Officer for the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's my pleasure to introduce those that participated in the press conference today. To my far left is Robert Wells. He's a special agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in North Carolina. Anthony Spotswood is next to him, and he is the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms here in North and South Carolina. Far right is our United States Marshal, Michael East. Next to him is our Chief of Raleigh Police Department, Estella Patterson. And now I'll ask my boss, the United States Attorney Michael Easley, to come up and give some opening remarks.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for being here today. I'm United States Attorney Michael Easley for the Eastern District of North Carolina. As Don Connolly mentioned in his introduction, I'm joined today with Special Agent in charge of the FBI, Bobby Wells, Assistant Special Agent in charge of the ATF, Anthony Spotswood, United States Marshal Mike East, and of course, our Chief of Police, Estella Patterson. Thank you so much. We're here today to discuss a joint federal initiative for combating violent crime. As you know, violent crime is on the rise nationally, particularly gun violence, and as we've seen in the recent days and months, North Carolina is not immune. We live in a country where all people are entitled to live free, to live, work, and raise a family in their own communities without fear of gun violence. But there are parts of our community that do not feel free, where folks do not feel free to sit on their front porch, go out at night, or let their kids play outside. Law enforcement has a vital role in protecting those freedoms and in safeguarding our communities. Last year, there were 33 homicides in Raleigh. This year, there have already been 24, and it is just July. Last week, as many of us celebrated the July 4th holiday and America's promise of freedom, 5 were killed by gun violence, including a 23-month-old baby. We are here today to announce firm and concrete actions as part of a new federal strategy designed to deliver justice and hold accountable those who sow fear in our communities. We are also sending a message that the violence must stop. We are prioritizing cases involving the illegal possession of firearms, gun trafficking and straw purchases, armed gangs and drug trafficking organizations, and shootings in our community. And we are announcing today a recent wave of indictments as a part of that strategy. In the last 3 weeks, in Raleigh alone, the joint efforts of these agencies, along with Wake County District Attorney Lauren Freeman and her staff, have led to the indictment of 27 individuals facing 50 federal and 25 state charges among them, including an array of drug trafficking and firearm offenses. 12 of the defendants are individual federal cases involving firearms, with another 8 of the federal cases involving a standalone organized crime investigation. I want to be clear that these charges are merely allegations and that each defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm not going to get into a recital of the evidence because there are legal and practical reasons why we cannot do that at this stage and why we must be limited in our comments. So we won't be sharing any information that could impact the outcome of any trial in this matter or any ongoing investigation. As part of these cases, law enforcement seized 26 firearms, over 200 rounds of ammunition, over 6 kilograms of narcotics, including 600 bundles of heroin, 600 bundles of heroin, 296 grams of crack, and 13 grams of fentanyl, enough to provide over 7,000 potentially deadly doses of this synthetic opioid. Also seized was one non-serialized ghost gun. Law enforcement additionally seized over $40,000 in U.S. currency. I will briefly highlight 2 multi-defendant cases which illustrate our strategy. First, organized crime and drug trafficking. As alleged in public court filings, 8 of the defendants charged today are part of a narcotics trafficking organization allegedly led by Akeem Natron Holder Evans, who I'll refer to as Holder. The organization has members affiliated with multiple criminal street gangs, including the Gangster Killer Bloods, the 6 Deuce Blood Brims, and the 9 Trey Bloods, all subsets of the United Blood Nation. Members of the organization are geographically linked to the Kingwood neighborhood in southeast Raleigh, more commonly referred to among its members as Exit 300. Many of its members have long criminal histories, including Holder, who has a prior federal conviction for drug trafficking. In February of 2022, after intercepting wire communications, law enforcement stopped a vehicle in Raleigh, driven by William Henry Johnson Jr., and followed by Holder in a separate trailing vehicle. Johnson is alleged to have possessed 6 kilograms of cocaine. Court documents further allege that in the following weeks, Holder and Trey Devontae Evans continued distributing cocaine, cocaine base, and fentanyl from several locations in the Kingwood neighborhood. In March of 2022, search warrants were executed at 8 residential locations in Wake and Johnston counties. Drugs, multiple firearms, and U.S. currency were seized. This case was brought by the hard work of the FBI Safe Streets Task Force, Raleigh Police Department, and the ATF. Second example, straw purchasing and gun trafficking. Another defendant, unrelated to the Holder case, is charged in court filings with making false statements on ATF gun purchase forms when buying handguns at Perry's Guns in Wendell and Cabela's in Garner. She did so knowing that she was actually buying those guns for another person, Braxton D'Angelo Benton, a felon who was barred by law from acquiring and possessing a firearm. Both Benton and defendant Wilson are charged with illegally selling firearms. Benton is also charged with being a felon in possession of ammunition. Be warned, if you buy a gun for a felon, you are violating federal law and you will be prosecuted. Gun violence is among the greatest challenges of our time. We will not address it overnight, and we will not address it with prosecution alone. Driving down the crime rate will take a concerted effort from all levels of government, law enforcement, and the community to solve this deadly problem. It will also take a concerted effort by policymakers to emphasize mental health, healthcare, housing, and inequality. But we and our federal partners are committed to bringing our federal forces to bear in partnership with our local law enforcement partners and our community partners to address violent crime, seek justice for the victims, and help the communities that have been plagued by violence for far too long. For those considering trafficking in guns and violence in North Carolina, be warned. You are on notice. You will be found and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We will do all we can to seek justice for victims and for communities who do not want gun violence in their neighborhoods. Last Thursday, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the criminal racketeering convictions and successive multiple life sentences for 2 former blood gang leaders in the Raleigh community. Those gang leaders terrorized parts of Raleigh with murder, robberies, and intimidation for nearly 2 decades. The court, in its written opinion of the Fourth Circuit, noted, quote, that the collective malevolence of the gang led to a neighborhood where so many deserve so much better, where respect for the old and opportunities for the young existed no longer. We and our law enforcement partners will make every effort to make our communities safer, more fair, and more free, to promote respect for the law and renew the promise of freedom and opportunity in all corners of North Carolina. With that, I'd like to invite our Chief of Police, Estella Patterson, forward to make some remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Easley. The Raleigh Police Department is grateful for the outstanding partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the ATF, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshal Service that had led to the 27 indictments in this case, as Mr. Easley spoke about. I believe it's these types of collaborations and partnerships that enables law enforcement to keep the streets of Raleigh safe from those who seek to victimize. I'd like to commend the men and women who work these cases tirelessly, leaving no stone unturned in gathering evidence and exhausting all leads with every investigative tool available to them. I'm extremely, extremely proud of the work of our task force officers, but also to RPD's Career Criminal Unit, Criminal Enterprise Drug Unit, Gang Suppression Unit, and Selective Enforcement Unit, all of whom are among the best that we have in law enforcement in this state and in this region. I especially want to thank Mr. Easley for his vision and proactivity in devising a federal level comprehensive violent crime action plan. This is what we need in our community. I'm happy to know that Mr. Easley shares my desire to make Raleigh the safest city in the country and has fully committed the resources to move us in that direction. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Raleigh community for your support of law enforcement and your confidence in us to serve and protect. We cannot do the work that we do without public support. We will continue serving with the highest level of service delivery the Raleigh Police Department is known for. It is my intention to continue providing the necessary resources to identify and seek prosecution of those who commit violence in our community, those who sell and traffic narcotics, and those who break the laws that impact the quality of life for our residents. I stand with my local, state, and federal partners to interrupt all criminal enterprises operating in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'd like to invite Anthony Spotswood up. Anthony is an accomplished agent, now in a supervisory role as an assistant special agent in charge with the ATF. And if you would, Mr. Spotswood, I'd love if you could share a little bit about the NIBIN system and crime gun intelligence. As we mentioned, there were 26 guns seized as part of the cases we've talked about here today. And the investigation doesn't stop when we seize those guns. And I'd like you to share a little bit about how valuable it is to get those guns off the street and what we can do with the technology that ATF brings to the Raleigh Police Department.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to first thank U.S. Attorney Michael Easley, his staff, and the law enforcement partners that are here with us today. Our mission here at ATF is to identify and target those individuals who are committing violent crime in our communities. This initiative did just that. In fact, many of those who are involved in this initiative have extensive criminal histories. For example, those who have been federally prosecuted or will be federally prosecuted have a total of 106 combined previous arrests, 37 previous felony convictions. These are the right targets. It was imperative to not only investigate, prosecute, and hold these individuals accountable, but it's also equally important to continue with this collaboration and partnership that we have going forward. A felon in possession of a firearm is a community issue. It's one of the things that we look at quite often in ATF, and we have to hold those people accountable. Anyone who's helping these people obtain firearms is also a danger to our community and a problem when it comes to public safety. It's because of this that ATF is committed to assisting the U.S. Attorney's Office, the local, state, and federal law enforcement counterparts in attacking violent crime. We do our part by identifying firearms traffickers, those who are selling and illegally possessing firearms, and those engaged in thefts of firearms and straw purchasing. During this initiative, we utilized a number of different resources. One of those being firearms tracing, another one being ballistic identification using our NIBIN system, which is a system that can utilize the shell casings and the firearms that we recover from different crime scenes across the state and the country, and combine those crime scenes so that we can give that first active lead to our investigators out there who's investigating other violent crimes across the country. ATF will continue to utilize these technologies in order to fight violent crime. In addition, the collaboration with our special agents and our industry operations investigators and the sharing of intelligence through our Crime Gun Intelligence Center. ATF stands firm in fighting violent crime, and we will continue to stand side by side with our law enforcement partners here as we try to make our community safer. Thank you.
Thank you, ASAC Spotswood. Yeah, I'd next like to invite our Special Agent in charge of the FBI, Bobby Wells, forward to speak some about the tremendous effort of the FBI Safe Streets Task Force in Eastern North Carolina. The case that I mentioned earlier, where the Fourth Circuit affirmed criminal racketeering convictions, was also a product of the Safe Streets Task Force. And it restored what was an incredibly violent community to a place of peacefulness. And I'd like to invite Special Agent in Charge Wells forward to talk about their incredible work, along with Assistant U.S. Attorney Robbie Dodson on the Holder drug trafficking organization. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Easley, Chief Patterson, and our partners with ATF and U.S. Marshals. I truly value our partnerships with these agencies. We all share the common goal of removing violent offenders from the streets of Raleigh and the surrounding areas. I'm honored the FBI could partner with these agencies to disrupt the Akeem Holder drug trafficking organization. Many federal agents on the Safe Streets Task Force, along with task force officers from Raleigh PD, analysts, and other law enforcement professionals, worked countless hours to build this case. With these indictments, we've charged an organization with engaging in significant criminal activity. As alleged in the criminal complaint, this organization, run by brothers from different local gangs, teamed up to saturate our streets with dangerous drugs like cocaine and fentanyl. And they did so while carrying dangerous weapons. Investigations like this prove the essential value of strong law enforcement partnerships. Unfortunately, we see crime like this every day across the country. Nationwide, we've seen a disturbing rise in violent crime. Drug trafficking, gun violence, homicides, aggravated assaults are all occurring at an appalling rate. These crimes are impacting local communities and innocent people. We will continue to attack it with every federal, state, and local resource we have at our disposal. For those of you living in neighborhoods that have been hit hard by drug trafficking and gun violence, I encourage you to reach out to us with any information you think might be useful. I know this is a tough ask, but your voice matters. And you can always reach us anonymously by calling 1-800-CALL-FBI or going to tips.fbi.gov. Partnerships between law enforcement and the community matter, and together we can reverse the increase in violent crime. Thank you.
Thank you. We can try to answer some questions if there are any. There may be some we may not be able to answer at this stage of the litigation. Yes?
Yes, you had mentioned the ghost gun that was recovered. Can you talk about, is this a growing epidemic on the city streets of Raleigh? We hear a lot about them, but you mentioned you only confiscated one. What can you tell us about that and also combating these?
Yeah, our friends with the ATF and we at the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Chief as well are deeply concerned about the proliferation of ghost guns on the streets. These are non-serialized, privately made firearms that are commercially available online. I commend policymakers in Washington who have taken this threat seriously and who have taken action to try to tighten some of the regulations around these guns, but they are turning up. And the statistics bear that out. It is a growing trend, and I will say that North Carolina is among some of the top states in the country for the number of ghost guns that are seized as crime guns. I don't have the statistics with me right now, but I recall North Carolina being in league with states like Texas, which have an even higher population than North Carolina in terms of the number of ghost guns that have been seized. So we're seeing it increasingly used by the criminal element in order to evade detection. Yes, ma'am.
No, I just wanted to ask, this partnership, how actually new is it? Why is it just forming? And will it continue? Is this like a one-time thing?
Yeah, right. So what I can tell you is we have long had a partnership among our multiple agencies, but we have adopted a new strategy in our approach in response to rising gun violence. It is a national trend. North Carolina is not immune to it. But now, particularly in response to recent events, is a time to reaffirm our commitment and look very hard at how we're appropriately resourcing that and how we prioritize different types of cases. And so a couple of things that we did in pulling together this strategy, I'll give you a few points. First of all, we brought all of our federal agencies to the table, and we agreed on the fact that we needed to do more. Everybody needed to do more to step up to the plate, and we needed to strategically target and focus our limited resources on the most significant drivers of violent crime. That's number one. Number two, in my office, we have assigned dedicated prosecutors from both our violent crime and our organized crime section. Both of those prosecutors are here with me today, and they are actively and constantly interfacing with Raleigh Police Department to identify cases that are appropriate for federal prosecution. That's number two. The third is we have bolstered those violent crime and organized crime prosecutions with support from other sections within the U.S. Attorney's Office. So even prosecutors who handle economic crimes or white-collar crimes are stepping up to the plate to help out on an issue that we know is really troubling a lot of communities in North Carolina, and I commend them for that. And then finally, I will say that we have truly and fully brought state prosecutors to the table. And so our assigned assistant U.S. attorneys are sitting at the table on a regular basis with state prosecutors to screen and route gun cases for priority prosecution in either the state or the federal system. So we've created a real structure and operating rhythm around the way that this partnership operates and the way those interactions happen. Creates more efficiency. It allows us to more effectively target people who are the drivers of violence and are the felons who are habitual in their possession of firearms, etc., and straw purchasers as well. So it is a long and lasting partnership with a renewed effort and a renewed strategy to really focus on things that we collectively have identified based on data and based on pure law enforcement experience on the streets as the real drivers and significant issues affecting our communities.
What was the length of the investigation and how big of a dent is it into the crime here in the capital city?
We believe it'll make a tremendous dent, and we're not here just to announce indictments, but also to promote a deterrent effect among those who would consider joining a gang or trafficking drugs or trying to acquire firearms for felons or felons with firearms or ammunition. There's still much more work to be done. This is not the end. This is the beginning of the beginning of a new era of much closer collaboration and coordination around some of the greatest threats affecting our community.
Question for Chief.
What's being done in the short term to stop the increase, and what do you contribute to the increase in Raleigh?
What do we attribute?
Attribute to the increase in violent cases.
Right. Well, I think we could not ignore the proliferation of guns and its impact on the increase in violent crime. You combine that with a period of time during the pandemic where people were increasingly vulnerable. They had decreased access to housing and employment and mental health services, healthcare, drug and substance abuse treatment. And so many people who were on the brink were pushed over the edge. And I believe we're going to be feeling the repercussions of that for some time. There is no short-term fix or short-term solution, but it's going to involve a couple of things that I will commend the chief on being very strong at. We can't solve this without real community engagement. Chief Patterson has renewed a trust in law enforcement and engaged with the community in a way that we haven't seen in some time. And I commend her for those outreach efforts, because if we don't have real trust and credibility in the communities that we serve, if people in our communities don't feel that law enforcement is working for them, we won't be able to come together and solve this problem. And I commend you, Chief, for doing that. You've done it with integrity, and it's going to make a big difference. I believe there was a question for you, so I'll invite you up as well.
Chief, can you speak about the recent shootings and cause and effect relationship between any city police staffing or overtime? And then what's your message to people who live in those neighborhoods that they were discussing?
Yeah, so as Mr. Easley said, last week we were on the heels of 4th of July. In Raleigh, we experienced 5 homicides over the course of 4 days approximately. I'm very pleased that in 4 of those cases, we've identified suspects. Those cases, we know that the suspects and the victims were known to each other. We believe even in the 5th case that there might be some nexus there. So we are continuing to work those, to investigate them, to come to the fullest so that we can get a resolution there. The message to the community, I would say that our officers are around the clock working hard. Collaborations like this is an example of that, but also too, we're more visible in the areas that we know that there is high crime. We are very intentional about making sure that we connect with the community, as Mr. Easley has talked about. That is something that is near and dear to my heart. We want to make sure that the community is part of the solution. One of the things that I'm very proud of, our city making investments in community interrupter programs. And we're going to be talking about that more tomorrow. We're going to be inviting you to come to a press conference where I'm going to release my second quarter numbers. We'll be talking more about those community interrupters because we need the community to take action on what we're seeing across the board with the violence in all these communities. Thank you. Anything else?
Thank you. And I'll add, just going off of that, Chief, and as a framework for thinking about solving violent crime, I want to reiterate that we've got to think about this as a three-legged stool. It is focused in strategic enforcement, number one. Number two, it is a meaningful prevention and intervention with the community, and that's what Chief Patterson is going to speak more about tomorrow. And number three, it's having real and significant and meaningful reentry programs to ensure that folks who are reentering society have housing and they have support and they can reintegrate in a way that doesn't lead them back into a life of criminality. But I'll reiterate today that our mandate is that with every new case we take, that we make the streets safer tomorrow than they were the day before. And we believe that we have done that with this operation, and we will continue to do that. I will reiterate that through the course of these cases, 26 firearms were seized, over 200 rounds of ammunition, 1 non-serialized ghost gun. Also seized were over 6 kilograms of illegal narcotics, 600 bundles of heroin, 296 grams of crack, and over 7,000 potentially deadly doses of fentanyl. The streets are safer tomorrow than they were the day before because of the efforts of this tremendous group of law enforcement professionals. Thank you so much.